Reni Eddo-Lodge, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. In Reni Eddo-Lodge's insightful book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, readers are taken on a journey that explores the complex dynamics of race, racism, and systemic oppression. The book delves into Britain's history of colonialism, imperialism, and its relation to the harsh realities faced by people of color in the present day. Eddo-Lodge exposes the myth of colorblindness and emphasizes the necessity of engaging in open, honest dialogues to bridge the communication gap and foster understanding among different racial groups. Through an examination of structural racism, white privilege, and the intersections of race and class, this book highlights the steps needed to challenge existing systems and create a more inclusive and equal society.
Break the silence. The myth of colorblindness is debunked as a Black British journalist discusses the urgent need for white people to join the conversation on racism in Britain. Reni Eddo-Lodge's blog post went viral when she expressed her frustration with white people's indifference to structural racism. Since then, she has challenged the system by initiating productive conversations between all strata of society. Breaking the silence on race inequalities in Britain is a crucial step towards bridging the communication gap that exists between white people and people of color. Britain's roots of racism. Britain's history of colonialism, imperialism, and slavery are all intricately tied to its present-day issues of racism. Many British people are unaware of the country's involvement in the slave trade and its mistreatment of Black and Asian soldiers during times of war. The deep-seated legacy of racism persists today and must be understood to address current issues. Britain's Black Civil Rights Movement. Britain's history of institutional racism and its impact on Black civil rights movements are explored in this summary of The Windrush Betrayal. The Windrush Betrayal recounts Britain's history of institutional racism and its impact on Black civil rights movements. The book reveals that while the transatlantic slave trade is often associated with the United States, Britain too has its legacy of Black civil rights struggles. Despite the British Nationality Act of 1948 giving Commonwealth citizens the same residency rights as British citizens, people of color faced many challenges when trying to assimilate. They were largely denied housing, leading to a seemingly never-ending era of inadequate living conditions and unscrupulous landlords. The racist Notting Hill riots of 1958 only added to the plight of people of color, and in response, Parliament passed the 1962 Commonwealth Immigrants Act. This reduced the immigration rights of Commonwealth citizens, forcing them to rely on work permits to settle in the country. Institutional racism also pervaded throughout the police force, as evidenced by the London riots of 1985, which began when police shot 37-year-old Cherry Gross in the chest. Riots broke out in Brixton following the incident, and other similar incidents of institutional racism in the 1980s. The book highlights how responses to such riots have been inadequate, with those in power too ready to blame racial disadvantage instead of acknowledging the existence of institutional racism. The Windrush Betrayal is a thought-provoking examination of British institutional racism and the Black civil rights movements that have struggled against it. The impact of structural racism. Structural racism is not just limited to institutions like the police. It affects people of color in various ways, from education to employment and even health. Research has shown that there are implicit biases against people of color, leading to fewer opportunities in life, including lower grades in school and discrimination in the job market. Positive discrimination is a proven way to level the playing field, as demonstrated by the Rooney Rule, which helped increase the hiring of people of color in the National Football League. This mild form of consideration can create much-needed opportunities for people of color to succeed. White privilege and systemic racism. The book discusses how white people benefit from systemic racism through white privilege, even if they don't see themselves as racist. The author shares her personal experiences of losing out on job opportunities due to structural racism and the frustrating conversation with a white woman who was completely oblivious to her white privilege. White privilege tends to operate between individuals and often goes unnoticed. Conversing with progressive white people who don't see their white privilege can be more frustrating than facing a self-declared racist. The book sheds light on how white privilege sustains systemic racism and why recognizing it is crucial for effective change. Fear of a Black Planet. The lack of positive Black representation in media reflects a deeper fear among some white people of a future where Black people become the majority. This fear stems from a desire to maintain power and privilege within the system. The 2016 Brexit vote exemplifies this fear, as voters feared losing their advantages to immigrants. One solution to combat this fear is to champion Black protagonists in fiction so that white people can empathize with them. However, this can be difficult, as the default mentality still reverts to whiteness as the norm. White feminism and the need for intersectionality. Lena Dunham's show Girls was praised for its feminist representation of young women until the lack of diversity in the cast sparked a backlash. This is indicative of a larger problem in mainstream feminism: white privilege. White feminism fails to include the struggles of women of color and only serves their own demographic. Intersectionality, the idea of overlapping discrimination faced by marginalized groups, is crucial in the feminist movement. Some white feminists reject this idea, but the author argues that race analysis is necessary for achieving equal opportunities for all. Otherwise, the movement will continue to uphold exclusionary systems. The complexities of Britain's class structure. British politicians often use the term white working class to describe the country's disadvantaged, but the reality is much more complex. The traditional three-tier system doesn't apply anymore, and non-white people are less likely to become wealthy. Budget cuts also disproportionately affect people of color, compounding class inequalities. The phrase, white working class, stokes fears of immigrants, helping the elite white ruling class remain in power. Despite this, a report from The Economist shows that the richest in the UK benefit more from public resources than their impoverished counterparts. Both class and racialized class prejudice must be taken into account to understand the reality of working-class Britain today.
Reni Eddo-Lodge's powerful work sheds light on the deeply ingrained issues of race and racism in modern Britain. She provides a clear perspective on the historical roots of racism, the manifestations of structural racism, and the need for acknowledgement and conversation. By taking a critical look at white privilege and the often unexamined advantages it provides, the book emphasizes that dismantling systemic racism requires a collective effort from all societal strata. Addressing these key topics and presenting workable solutions, such as positive discrimination, Eddo-Lodge encourages readers to engage in conversations on race and become agents of change. Ultimately, the book imparts an urgent message: for meaningful progress to be made, we must be willing to have open, honest discussions about race, privilege, and social injustice.